So how we pronounce it, the right pronunciation, I mean...
Ura.
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 Okay. Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for your time, for having us on one-on-one interview with FIFA.co.id. And now we're talking about the war in Russia and Ukraine. We know that more than a month now. What is actually Russia want to tell the world about the recent situation in the war?
Well, thank you so much for willing to know the position of Russia that the mainstream Western media do not reflect. First of all, we're not in the state of war with Ukraine. We are not having a war with Ukrainian people. It's something very different. You know, for the people of Indonesia to understand, I would like to say that for us, Ukrainians are people that are very close to us. We're practically the same nation. We share the same culture, same traditions, same religion. Many people in Russia have friends and relatives in Ukraine and vice versa. Before this operation started, we had more than 3 million Ukrainians working in Russia. Even now, we accepted already more than 500,000 Ukrainian refugees coming from Ukraine. It's officially, but those who registered as refugees, but as many people in Ukraine have relatives and friends, there are much more Ukrainians who come to Russia. So this is not a war. I was born in Ukraine myself, though I'm Russian. So this is not war. This is a special military operation that has very well-defined targets. And I want to stress that we're not targeting civilians. We're targeting just military installations, and we're trying to spare civilians. There's a lot of fakes going on about the so-called atrocities performed by Russian armed forces. That is not true, absolutely, because we try to conduct the operation very carefully, without hurting the civilians. That's why we're opening humanitarian passages. We are trying to evacuate civilian population from the cities that are surrounded. We're providing humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians. Wherever our armed forces come, they also bring food and water to Ukrainians, and they distribute this food and necessities to Ukrainian people. So the goals of the operation is not to destroy Ukraine or to occupy Ukraine or not even to change the regime in Ukraine. First of all, it's to protect the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, who for 8 years have been under constant attack from the Ukrainian side. And this was not also shown in the mainstream media, that for 8 years people were dying in Lugansk and Donetsk every day. 14,000 people killed by Ukrainian armed forces there, and not only by the armed forces but also neo-Nazi armed groups. 14,000 people in 8 years, that means that every day people were dying there. And the so-called civilized world was turning a blind eye on that. Okay. The second goal is to demilitarize Ukraine and to denazify Ukraine. If you want me to explain what does it mean, I cannot avoid going back into history. Because from 2014, when after coup d'etat in Kiev, which was supported and even staged by the West, a very Russophobic government came to power and started to conduct very Russophobic policies in Ukraine. And also, you should understand that in Ukraine, to try, for instance, to ban Russian language, it's impossible because everyone in Ukraine speaks Russian, and maybe half of Ukrainian population think of themselves as ethnic Russians. They may be Ukrainian nationals, but they are ethnic Russians. So trying to ban Russian language, Russian culture, prevent children from studying Russian language in school, it's something impossible. And of course, the regions that were predominantly and still are predominantly Russian, they are very much against these policies. There were a lot of protests in 2014, also ignored by the West and by the Western media. Have you heard anything about the massacre in Odessa, for instance, when 40 people, peaceful protesters, were just burned alive in one of the buildings in Odessa? This crime was not punished by the Ukrainian side. It was we tried to urge Kiev to find the criminals who did it. We even know who did it. It were the neo-Nazi group Azov who did it, but no one was punished for this crime. So not only the government in Kiev started to oppress and suppress everything Russian, but also they started to use armed forces against the regions that were against this policies. Actually, there were three main regions: Crimea, Lugansk, and Donetsk. Crimea decided to go back to Russia. There was a referendum, and Russia accepted Crimea, and we protected the people of Crimea. In Lugansk and Donetsk, they proclaimed independence. At that time, we didn't recognize it. And the government in Kiev sent army troops against their own regions. From the very beginning, Russia tried to solve this issue by diplomatic means. In 2014, we initiated the Minsk agreements that were signed between Kiev and Lugansk and Donetsk. Also, it's absurd when we were accused of not fulfilling the Minsk agreements. We were not part of it. Actually, we initiated them. We urged the leaders of Lugansk and Donetsk to sit together with the representatives of the Kiev government and sign the agreements that would have solved this issue, this conflict inside Ukraine. Because the Minsk agreement, supported by the West actually, they provided for a solution that would preserve Ukrainian territorial integrity and allow Lugansk and Donetsk still be part of Ukraine while preserving their cultural identity, meaning Russian, of course. Because one of the main things that the Minsk agreement provided for was that Kiev should have granted Lugansk and Donetsk a special status, autonomous status, inside Ukraine. So Lugansk and Donetsk would still be part of Ukraine. But it never happened. Kiev didn't fulfill these agreements. For 8 years, we were trying to push Kiev to do so. Because how could we, just ignore the situation? These are Russian people suffering from the bombings and shellings from Ukrainian army and attacks from the neo-Nazi battalions or groups. And we were also trying to urge the West to push Kiev also to fulfill this agreement, but it didn't happen. So the war continued in Lugansk and Donetsk for 8 years. Meanwhile, the West was turning Ukraine into an anti-Russian project. They were providing arms to Ukraine. They were investing a lot of money into brainwashing Ukrainians in believing that Russia is their enemy. And actually pushing Ukraine into conflict with Russia. Of course, the West and we see what is happening. NATO, they are reluctant to have a direct confrontation with Russia. They don't want to do that because it would mean World War III and nuclear, and who would want that? No one in his right mind. So they actually was pushing Ukraine in this confrontation. We wanted to prevent it by all means, and we were trying to make also the West understand our security concerns. You know that NATO, which in 1991, even before that in 1989, promised to us not to expand towards our territory, has expanded 5 rounds or even 8 rounds of expansion. But the red line for us was that Ukraine becomes member of NATO. And it's easy to understand because Ukraine is a very big country. We have a 2,000 kilometers of border with Ukraine. If NATO brings its infrastructure to our border with Ukraine, it means that 3 minutes the missile will reach Moscow. How could we not feel threatened by that? Of course we felt threatened. And we tried to talk with the West. In December last year, we even drafted an agreement on security guarantees for Russia, and we submitted it to the United States and NATO. No response. So that is, and Zelensky, meanwhile, declared that, President of Ukraine, declared that Ukraine is ready to have, is prepared to have nuclear arms. And I can tell you, Ukraine has all the potential to do so. They have industrial infrastructure, they have a very well-educated population, they have the scientific potential, so they have all the opportunities and the potential to do so. Another thing you've heard, I'm sure, about biolabs that were built by the established by the United States, more than 30 biolabs. More than 30 in Ukraine alone, 300 all over the world, mostly along the borders with Russia.
In many cities in Ukraine.
In many cities in Ukraine, in many regions in Ukraine, but all over the world they have more than 300. There was one in Indonesia, Namru 2, which was closed in 2010. And now we have all the documents proving that what was going on in these biolabs, controlled absolutely by the United States, was the development of toxic, very dangerous pathogens that could be released and spread very dangerous diseases that could lead to thousands or tens of thousands of deaths. So it's biological weapon actually, and biological weapons are banned by international law. So the question is, whom this or what country this biological weapon would be targeting? I think the answer is obvious: Russia, of course. Or why would otherwise all these biolabs be on the border of Russia?
Okay.
So this is on demilitarization. If you want me to explain what about denazification, I can do that also.
You can explain it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And how about the casualties in Russia's side? We know that Ukraine government said that Russia, especially Russian armed force has lost many personals, artillery system, aircraft, and etc. Or maybe you have a different data about this.
Well, it's absolutely, you know, there's so many fakes about what is going in Ukraine, and they're disseminated by the Ukrainian side, of course, but also by the West. It's not true. We have we have official data from our Ministry of Defense, how many casualties. We have around 1,500 from our side. I believe from the Ukrainian not much more. I think we have lost any aircrafts? I don't believe so actually. Maybe not not even the number is not considerable at all. Maybe, you know, if 1, 2, 3, it's like that. On the other hand, the Ukrainians actually have lost all their air forces and navy forces. They don't have that anymore. So the numbers of casualties are much, much less than the Ukrainians would like to see, or the West is pretending. Also, you can, maybe the latest fakes, and there's a lot of noise made about it, it's the so-called, you know, atrocities of the Russian troops in the city of Bucha. It's a total fake and even not very carefully made, because when the Ukrainian armed forces came back to this city, which was occupied by Russian armed forces, and then the Russian armed forces left on the 30th of March, the Ukrainian armed forces came on the 2nd of April. After the Russian armed forces left, the mayor of Bucha, he made some statements. He's Ukrainian, and he never mentioned any casualties or any bodies lying in the streets. Of course, he would have done it because he's from the Ukrainian side, basically. And then, okay, there were no actually armed forces in the city for a couple of days. Why all these bodies were not buried? What they were waiting for? Again, if you look at the videos and the photos, you can see that many of the bodies, and it's a tragedy. I'm not saying it's, you know, people died, of course. It's a tragedy, but you can see that many of them are wearing a white band on the sleeve. And it's a proven fact that the people who supported Russia actually were wearing these white bands. So how could, you know, Russians kill people supporting Russia? What is that? That is absolutely, it's absurd. Also, that our, you know, with all this modern systems of communication, it's very easily checked when our troops left Bucha and when the Ukrainian armed forces came in. So that's it's a total fake. And now this fake is used by the Ukrainians and the West to impose more sanctions, to create a lot of, hatred against Russia, to instigate this Russophobic sentiments in Ukrainians and all over the world. So what I'm trying to say that, of course, you should very carefully analyze the information that is coming from Ukrainian and from the West. 90% is not true.
Okay, and what is interesting, Your Excellency, because we know, after all, so far it seems that Ukraine can stand this war. Even they believe they could win this war, this military operation, maybe, if you say it so. What do you say about it?
Well, they are very much supported. They are very much supported by the West. The West is providing armaments, the moral support, the training of Ukrainian armed forces, and even there is information, I don't know whether it was proved, there are a lot of instructors from NATO countries. But I can tell you that the operation, our operation is going according to the plan. That's what our president said. That is what our Ministry of Defense status, and it will be completed according to the plan. If it's not going quickly, it is because we are very careful not to hurt people. If we wanted to do it quick, I can assure you, we could have done it, but we don't want to do that because we don't want to hurt people.
Okay, and what about the accusation about a criminal war in Ukraine accused by Ukraine government and US alliance?
Who is talking? I would say that the reaction to this military operation is absolutely unproportional and hysterical. Because I'm not saying that the military option is the best. Of course not. But we were left with no other option, because now the information was made public that the Ukrainian armed forces, supported by the West, were planning a massive attack on Lugansk and Donetsk and Crimea. So there would have been a military crisis anywhere, but we are trying to prevent much more casualties and people being killed. Because if Ukrainian army conducted a massive attack on Lugansk and Donetsk, tens of thousands, or Crimea, 10,000s of people would have died. So we are trying to prevent something more tragic and bigger from happening. And if you remember all the military operations conducted by the United States and their allies. Okay, Iraq. You know how many people died in Iraq? Civilians, more than 1 million. You know how many people died in 1999 in Yugoslavia? Around 3,000. Yugoslavia was bombed by NATO for 78 days. Everything destroyed, hospitals, civilian infrastructure, homes of people. Libya, destroyed. Syria, they tried to do that. Afghanistan, 20 years of war in Afghanistan. Okay, Israel bombing Gaza. Where is the hysterical reaction of the West? Where are all the sanctions, etc.? What about war crimes? On the contrary, actually, we also have proof that the Ukrainian army, they have performed war crimes, killing Russian prisoners and torturing Russian prisoners. We are going to submit that to the United Nations.
Okay. And before President Zelensky said that he asked President Putin for peace talk negotiations, but why President Putin has not responded yet? I mean, maybe they could negotiate directly, because we know President Putin is very powerful to stop this military operation.
The talks, we are in talks with the Ukrainian side. We have talked several rounds already. The latest one was in Istanbul, and I believe that sometime soon there will be another round of talks. As far as I understand, it was stated by the press secretary of our president, that we don't exclude the possibility of President Putin and President Zelensky meeting, but only after these talks have some result.
Okay.
While the delegations, after the delegations have negotiated some result, and one of the results could be an agreement. So the Ukrainian side, during the previous round of talks, they've submitted their proposals, and we're considering them.
Okay. So
the delegation will meet shortly, and they will continue to discuss it.
Yes, you mean that President Putin may be waiting for the steps to waiting for the progress of this peace talk, and then maybe they could meet.
Yes, that's the idea. That's the idea. I'm not saying that that's what will happen, but we don't exclude this possibility.
Good. Okay. Mainstream media before reported there are 1,000 Russian people who protested this military operation have been arrested. Maybe is it true? Maybe you can give the situation in your country.
No, it's not true. Again, not true. The recent polls done in Russia showed that around 80% of Russians support what the decision made by President Putin to conduct this operation. Of course, there are some people who don't agree. Some of the Russians, including some of the celebrities, have left Russia. Well, that's their right, actually. They have the right to disagree. There were some protests, but there were some people detained, but not because they were protesting against the operation, but because they just violated some norms. You know, in every country, if you want to have a demonstration, you need to prevent the authorities to organize it. If you don't do that, it will be illegal. So that's the point. But I don't know about thousands of people arrested or anything. No, it's not true, of course.
Okay. Russia now is facing huge sanctions from US and European countries. So how your country just deal with this?
Well, first of all, these sanctions are absolutely illegal. And what the West is doing, and it's something that is very unlogical. First of all, they are destroying the whole system of international trade that was created in the last decades, and they're smashing all the supply chains, and so these actions are backfiring. Why they're doing that? Usually it's logical. If this, well, the sanctions are illegal. The only body in the world that has the right to impose sanctions is the Security Council of the United Nations. But if you apply sanctions, usually it means that you want to change the government policies. Has it ever worked? No. Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Russia is under sanctions from 2014. Has it made the government change its policies? No. If you want to, and that's what the West is saying, if you want to destroy the economy and hurt the people, well, it doesn't work also. Yes, in a sense, it hurts the people, but then what about democracy, human rights, you know, things like that? When you say that the aim of the sanctions is to destroy the Russian economy, how about, you know, human rights? So you want to make Russian people suffer. Where is the human rights and democracy and all that? Also, of course, it is in a sense, maybe it's now, it's a window for opportunity for Russia, because first of all, we will never trust the West again. Because when they, for instance, they freeze the reserves of our central bank, and they did it not only with Russia, but with many countries previously, and they have never returned. Freezing means stealing. They have stolen our money. So maybe it's high time to stop using their currencies as our reserves. How can we trust them when they just steal our money? And I think for many countries it's an eye-opener. How can you trust the West, and how can you keep your reserves in dollars or euros? Because any second they don't like you, they say you're bad, and then they just take your reserves. You know, I already gave this comparison that, okay, I like your house, and I say you're bad, and I say to you, give me your house. Why? Because you're bad. But how can you do it? Where is the legal basis? Where is the law? Oh, don't worry, I adopt a law. I say, in this law I write, because you are bad, I have the right to take your house, and I take your house. So they behave like bandits. On the other hand, it's quite a good business, because they invested around $40 billion in Ukraine, in turning Ukraine to an anti-Russian project, and now they have more than around 300 billion US of our reserves. Very good investment, I would say. So, of course, the sanctions will not make our life easier, but it's not new for something new for us. We've been under sanctions for 2014.
Okay. So, in response to this current situation, is there any specific strategy or countermeasure in response to these huge sanctions?
Yes, absolutely. To develop our own industry, to not be dependent on foreign partners, I mean Western partners. You know, in 2014, when the first round of sanctions were imposed, we developed our own agriculture. Before that, we were very dependent on the food imports. But since then, we're absolutely self-sufficient in food production. And of course, we don't produce bananas or mangoes, but we'll buy that from Southeast Asia and Indonesia. We became #1 wheat exporter. Now we export. Now we don't import food. We export. We export beef. We export chicken. We export wheat. We export seafood. So the sanctions have. We've learned our lessons.
Kind blessing in disguise.
Perhaps. Of course, you know, I'm not. I cannot maybe assess the whole situation, but from my point of view, of course, there will be a period that will not be easy for our economy to adapt. But the end, we can adapt because we are very rich in natural resources. Actually, we have everything, you know, beginning from oil and gas, metals, gold, whatever. We are self-sufficient in food. We have a developed industry. We have a very well-educated population. So if we just concentrate on developing our own products, I'm sure that we will succeed.
I see. Crisis makes winner. Your Excellency, you know that nowadays internet, social media is very significant to gain global support and to influence people's point of view. Including about this military operation. But you know that Ukraine said that Russia always used the propaganda, hoaxes to blur the facts in their country. How do you define it?
I would address that to the West, actually. As I told you, there is an information war launched against our country, and it's not started in February this year. It started quite a long time ago. You know, I was in Malaysia. My previous posting was in Malaysia, and when I was there, this terrible tragedy with MH17 aircraft happened when the Malaysian aircraft was shot down in Ukraine, and immediately. It was like, you know, an order from somewhere. There was a huge wave of accusations against Russia. Nothing was proved, no evidence, not a single day of investigation. But suddenly all the media, all the Western country were accusing Russia of shooting down this. It's a tragedy, more than 200 people died. But first of all, why should Russia do that, you know? So I was witness of how this huge mass of disinformation was immediately, a wave of disinformation came. Another example I can give you, when we were accused several times, Russia, of using chemical weapons in Syria against one of the spies in Great Britain, Ainsbury, and against our own opposition blogger Alexei Navalny. Chemical weapon is a weapon of mass destruction. If you use a chemical weapon, tens of thousands of people will die.
Not for person.
No one died with this. I mean, in Syria, it's another issue, but we didn't use that. why, first of all, why do you use a chemical weapon against one person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On the other hand, it's a fact. In 2018, it was proved, not by us, but by international experts, that we have destroyed all our stockpiles of chemical weapons. 2018 proved internationally. We committed. We fulfilled our obligations under the Convention on Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. No more. We don't have chemical weapons. So again, this disinformation, and every time it's being used to impose more and more sanctions.
Okay. Yeah. Then, why do you think? How do you think about the response of Indonesian government about this war, about this military operation so far?
Well, we see Indonesia as our friend and our partner. You know, of course, we know that Indonesia has supported the General Assembly resolution condemning the so-called war against Ukraine. But we were disappointed. But on the other hand, we do understand that there's a lot of pressure, of course, and you know, when there is an information war going on, they are the sides who are engaged in this war, and they are victims of this war. So many countries became victims, not quite understanding the real reason of this crisis. And of course, General Assembly resolution is non-binding. On the other hand, we know the response of the Indonesian side on all this pressure from the Western leaders to exclude Russia from G20, and we are very appreciative of this, of the balanced and reasonable position of Indonesia. We also don't feel any Russophobic sentiments in Indonesian people, and it's very important. Because in the West, actually, the Russophobic policies, these Russophobic sentiments, they don't really come from, you know, from the people. They are very much instigated by the governments.
It's like a top-down.
Yeah, like a top-down. And Indonesia, it's not the case. There is no Russophobic policies, and there is no Russophobic sentiments in the people. On the opposite, some people do support us, and we feel really, we appreciate that.
I see, because a week ago, Madam Ambassador, you thank Indonesian people just like taking Russia's side in this military operation. Is that because you think that majority of Indonesians support Russia, or what is your reason?
You know, I think that the cause of this conflict, it's not really about Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine is a victim.
I see.
It's an instrument used by the West. This is about Russia not willing to agree to the global dominance of the US and their alliance, of the Western world. We do not agree that just a small group of countries have the right to dictate the whole world what to do and how to live. We are open to cooperation and interaction with all countries in the world, but just including the US, including Europe, but as equal partners. We don't want someone to think that we are just, you know, servants, or we can just be exploited, our natural resources can be used, but we are not equal with these countries. So, and the problem is that the West doesn't agree to the global transformation that is going on from a unipolar world to a multipolar one, because so many centers of powers are emerging now. Russia, China, ASEAN, including Indonesia, Latin American countries, African countries, and they didn't support the sanctions against Russia. And I think actually that Indonesian people do understand that it's not about Ukraine, it's about this global dominance of the West. And the West has been used to it for centuries. They dominated their colonies, and they are not willing to agree to lose this power that they're losing, of course. So we're living in a very significant period of global history, and the world is going a very dramatic transformation. And I think that Indonesian people do understand that it's basically it's not about Ukraine.
I see. Allowed me to ask about your opinion. Do you think that maybe President Putin will consider about many refugees, almost 4 million, I think, because a woman and children becomes the fragile victims of the war? Maybe he will consider about humanity crisis?
We're trying to prevent humanitarian crisis in Ukraine from happening. I mentioned where we come in the city, we open humanitarian passages so the people can get away. Ukrainians are preventing people from leaving. They're just not allowing their own people to leave because they don't want them to go to Russia. We're ready to accept. We already accept as I told you, 500,000 people, Ukrainian people, or even more unofficially, those who went to their relatives and friends in Russia. So we're distributing humanitarian assistance. More than 5,000 tons already have been distributed. Again, we don't want to harm Ukrainian people. You know, when we're being told about having pity on Ukrainians, but where were people, these people, why they didn't talk about children and women dying in Donetsk and Lugansk for 8 years? No one said a word about that. We were trying to tell the West repeatedly about that. We were trying to prevent people from dying in Lugansk. We were giving humanitarian assistance to them, but not a word from Western media.
Okay. And now, last but not least, Your Excellency, you know that there is an interesting trend nowadays, a word "ura." Ura is very popular among Indonesians now in social media, in direct "ura, ura." I know it means hooray, maybe.
Yeah.
But you can maybe give brief information about brief history of this word "ura."
Actually, it's a very ancient word. It's a very ancient word. I don't exclude that this has Sanskrit roots, actually, because Russian language is quite close to Sanskrit. We have like Indonesian. Yeah. We have many words from Sanskrit. So this is a very ancient word. It's a word meaning to encourage strong spirit, a cry of joy also, so that you feel, good, you feel you're in good mood.
Okay.
So yeah, to keep your spirit strong.
Okay. So how we pronounce it? The right pronunciation. I mean.
Ura.
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 Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your time. We hope the better situation for Russia and for Ukraine and for all the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much.